Have you ever wondered what the difference is between jersey relic patches and sports cards that are labeled with different sorts of language? Like, what is the difference between a patch that's said to be game worn, a patch that's said to be player worn, event worn, or not associated with any specific game, player, or event? What does that actually mean? Let's get into this. When jersey relics first started to be included in sports cards during the mid-1990s, in many ways it was a pretty revolutionary approach. Nowadays, it seems like an obvious thing to include in a sports card, but when it first appeared, it presented a new way of connecting the player to the sports fan. In early iterations of jersey patches, they were almost always labeled as game worn or game used, and this really was kind of the point of them. The idea of it not being game worn would have been considered kind of strange. Like, isn't the whole idea behind the concept in the first place that it's a game worn jersey? Some releases even went so far as to share details as to which game the card was used in. And while not everything was always perfect from this time, such as here's an article from 2014 reported on by sportscollectordaily.com about a court case related to counterfeit jerseys being peddled to sports card companies. But despite these occasional hiccups, for the most part, everything was game-worn relic. And there was still, by and large, pretty much consensus that game-used relics was the expectation, was the point, was the whole concept idea. But as can be seen in a lot of examples from the sports card production world, sometimes when a good idea is taken too far, it becomes a terrible idea, and eventually it can lose its purpose. The sports card companies started to take advantage of a collector's desire to have jersey relics, and they oftentimes began to move towards player-worn jersey relics. Now, at first glance, this may not seem like much of a difference. I mean, that jersey relic was worn by a player, right? So it's still a good one. But if you look at how it was done, in order for it to be considered player-worn, it no longer had to be used in official game. It just had to be worn. Maybe something where a player wears like 30 layers at once and then takes them all off and there's 30 jerseys, something like this. These all are still considered player worn. In a lot of cases, it might be that that player was paid for a specific amount of time to basically just put on a jersey, take it off, put it on a different jersey, take it off, put it on a different jersey, take it off, so that the company would end up having all of these player worn jerseys they could make relics with. But really, was that missing the point? I mean, yes, it is player worn, but it takes away a lot of the connection with the purpose of the jersey relics in the first place, of being something that was actually in the game, that was connected with the NBA, that was connected with that player in a meaningful way, and turned it into something that was a half-second connection, that was a shallow business-oriented connection, and that had no real connection, real true connection. In other scenarios, it may even have been that that player was sent a massive box of jerseys and asked to put them all on and then send them back to the company. And they would sign a contract saying they had done that, saying they would do this and that, but who knows? I mean, did they? So, yeah, I did it. No problem. But did they? We don't know for sure. I mean, they signed a contract saying they did. But did they? I don't know. So that sort of thing happened as well. But whatever your opinion about these player-worn jersey relics was, it's come a long way from there in a negative direction. In many ways, that was just the first step of taking it away from its original concept, to a little bit less of a connection, and since then we've come to even less of a connection. Now, before we get into kind of what it looks like nowadays with these like not associated with any player, game, or event things, the other one to look at kind of in between was the event worn jersey. Now, an event worn jersey is essentially something that was worn during an NBA event. It could have been, like I said before, maybe a photo shoot. Sometimes it might be like a jersey warm up or something. Oftentimes they would even call that like a warm up relic or a pregame relic or something like this. And this was also a common practice, but oftentimes those ones were actually used. They were actually used in an event. Sometimes it wouldn't be a basketball game, but they were used for something. And so that would be, maybe not as highly appreciated for a lot of people as game worn, but at least it had some actual purpose that wasn't just kind of trying to trick you into thinking it had a purpose. But for both the player worn and the event worn, for the most part, there was early on still a lack of transparency about what was the event or what does it mean that it was player worn. There was really no way to be able to know what was that jersey. Sometimes, like I said, sometimes there was sets that would release that didn't do it this way, but very often it was just impossible to know what was the reality of that relic? Was it actually connected to the player in the meaningful way, or was it not? It was hard to know. There was no transparency. And all the way up until the time of the pandemic, jersey relics continued to either be game worn, player worn, or event worn. These were really the three things. Or like a warm-up jersey or something, I'd call that event worn, a warm-up jersey or something like this. But they would be labeled like something like that. And this was really the way it was all the way up until the pandemic. But then came the pandemic, and this seemed to really shift things in a much more fundamental way with the direction that these jersey relics were going to go. And at first, of course it was. I mean, it makes complete sense when you think about what was happening in the world. Suddenly, game-worn jerseys are really hard to source, because of course they are. So first of all, the games weren't happening for a period of time, but even when they were happening, there's not as much movement. There was supply chain issues in every kind of space. So of course, it's going to become harder to source game-worn or player-worn or event-worn jerseys. There's no event. So, and you're probably not doing stuff in person with those players. So it's limiting the opportunities to get those kind of jersey relics. So of course it's going to become a little bit harder to source. But at the same time, for Panini, I think probably Topps as well was similar for this. I think maybe Panini is more. I'm just more aware of Panini. When this kind of supply chain issue is happening, Panini's going to try to make at least a temporary solution. And their temporary solution was to come up with using jersey patches that had nothing to do with anything, but just visually still had a visually appealing look that a lot of collectors just liked the card. So at first, this was kind of thought of, from what I understand, as kind of a temporary solution to a supply chain problem. In some ways, I could almost see this as a creative solution to a temporary problem. If it's not thought of as what's going to be happening forever, and it's just for a while, you can still have a nice looking card. Maybe you use that for 1 year of production, and then you move on from that. And then when people look back at that 1 year, they just remember, oh, that was the year. That was the pandemic year. Just like I have a feeling in the future, we'll look back at some of the cards where you can see in the crowd, everybody wearing face masks and be like, oh, that card was produced during the pandemic year. Huh, how interesting. And then maybe they would do the same thing if they see a jersey relic that wasn't associated with anything. They'd be like, oh, that must have been produced during the COVID times. That's so interesting. What an interesting piece of history, that people would look back 20 years from now and see that kind of history. But instead, it's become almost like the normal practice, which is really a shame. To me, it seems like part of this is probably because of the timing of how, Panini is losing their license. And so why would they really want to spend the extra time and money and energy to go back to what was happening before, when it was more expensive for them, it was more challenging, cost more, and it was just took more man hours and everything to get enough of those game worn jerseys to produce cards. Why not just keep doing what they're doing? They're selling cards, they're making money, they're going to lose their license in a few years anyway. What's the point from their perspective to really bother with it? And I think that's basically what happened. They could continue doing it because they had already set a precedent with it, and they could be lazy and it wouldn't really affect their bottom line, maybe a tiny bit, but they're about to lose their license anyway, so why really bother with it? So essentially, it seems like what happened is a temporary solution meeting a need happening at a time of a global pandemic became like the normal mode of operation, which maybe happened in a lot of things in the world during that time. But because this was happening for a period of time and established itself as normal, a sense of normalcy happened with it, now it's just the practice. Hoping that, Fanatics will shake things up. I mean, they do have access to a lot of game-worn jerseys. I hope they don't just say, oh, this has been working this way, let's keep doing this. I hope they'll be like, okay, we have this jerseys, we have game-used jerseys, we have cards, let's combine those. Hoping that's going to be the approach. We'll see what happens. Because the current situation is a little bit ridiculous. I've even kind of seen people who will see that, oh, this patch is not associated with anybody. I've seen some YouTube videos of people who actually peel apart the card to take out that patch and look on the back, and there's a name on it, but it's not that player. It'll be a different player or, a different team or something like that. Has nothing to do. They could have easily taken that patch and put it on a card for that actual player. Like DeAndre Swift, I saw in one. It was on the back of like a Jalen Hurts card or something like that. Why didn't they just, if it's DeAndre Swift and they have it labeled as DeAndre Swift, put it in a DeAndre Swift card? You have the name on there. What's the point of having the name on there? So, it seems like I've seen a couple of videos like this where it seems like it's just a production thing. It's just being well organized as a production company, as a card producing company, to be able to use what you have in the right kind of way. And it seems like that's not what's happening. This becomes a more accepted practice, even though the values of non-associated patches go down, for the production companies, for it to be an accepted practice, it seems like it's training people to be content with ineptitude. If that makes sense. It's like the business is doing something inept, but people are expecting the companies to not be doing very well and to be expecting ineptitude, which is really ridiculous for any business model. I do think that there is a general change in perception. I think when the non-associated patches first started, I don't think it was that big of a deal to a lot of people. For some it was. I mean, for some right away it was like, whoa, like this is ridiculous. What's the point of this? It's just like, you know, buy something at Goodwill, toss it in there. It doesn't have any connection to anything. And a lot of people had that feeling right away, but a lot of other people were kind of like, it's fine, you know, whatever, it's temporary, it still looks cool, it's a cool looking car, it just adds to the aesthetic. Oh, look at that one, it has 3 patches, even though it's like 3 patches of a Goodwill logo or whatever. Like it has an aesthetic value. But I think gradually over time it's gotten to a point where generally the non-associated patches are looked at as less than a card with no patch in it. I mean, you could look at like a Prism rookie of somebody, a base Prism rookie, and like the sensational swatch rookie of that same player will actually sometimes sell for less than the base Prism rookie does, even though there's a swatch in there. Because I think a lot of people are becoming frustrated with that kind of swatch that's not associated with anything. So I'm hoping that means that the production companies are gonna be like, why even bother with this? If we just don't put the swatch in there, the card is more appreciated by the customers than if we put in a fake swatch. Like, why put in a fake swatch? So hopefully they have enough kind of awareness and kind of self-reflection, business reflection to realize, you know, what their customers are actually hoping will happen. I don't know if they really focus on that because it doesn't seem to matter that much to their bottom line in the end. So my question is whether in the future I could see this going one of 2 directions. Either Fanatics, with their connection with sports memorabilia and the sports leagues, they really emphasize game used jerseys and they include those in the cards, and we go back to that and maybe even take it another level, take it to a better spot. It's possible Fanatics could do that. The other possibility is that doesn't happen and collectors just become more and more kind of disconnected with jersey relics as a concept, and that these no longer have value in collectors' minds, which is happening with some of these ones, it seems to me. So I hope that doesn't get a tipping point of that. I hope it's much more like Fanatics will use game used stuff, but we'll see what will happen in the future. I really could see it going one of those 2 directions. It's a little unfortunate because, you know, I see over the past year, like an autograph, even autographs are starting to, you know, because of too much supply of autographs, it seems like autograph cards are thought of a little bit lesser than they used to be because they were a bit more rare, a bit more hard to come by. Now they're so common. Their perception in the collector community is a little lower than it used to be. But I feel like generally with relics, their perception in the community is extremely, extremely low. I mean, a short printed card that has no connection with a player is now, you know, sought more than a jersey relic card, and the jersey relic cards are almost expected to be not associated with the player, so people don't even look sometimes to see if it is, and you know, it's a shame because I feel like it might take a bit of unlearning before we get back to a point where jersey relics are appreciated by a larger percentage of the hobby community, and we'll see if it can make that momentum shift, if it can swing the pendulum back to like this game used direction. Maybe the perception of jersey relics can become a positive thing again, like it used to be for so long. What are your thoughts about jersey relic cards, where they've come from, where they are now? You know, what you think the company can go to. Don't just share like your frustration about the current jersey relic things. I think that's pointless. If you need to offload, okay. If you need to unload your burdens, go ahead. But I think more useful is like, what do you think the actual company, the actual production companies should be doing, or why do you think this is valuable? What do you think if you were in charge at Panini or whatever? What would you do to really, or I should say, if you were in charge at Fanatics, what would you do to help things get nurtured in a more positive direction? That's it for this video. See you in the next one. Peace.